The boarding agent waved me through without scanning my ticket twice. I assumed it was the rain, the chaos, the lightning that had grounded half the gates. I climbed the jet bridge, slid into seat 2A, and only realized something was wrong when a man in cashmere asked who the stranger in his cabin was. Before we dive in, if you believe love sometimes arrives by accident, hit subscribe and stay until the very end. You won't regret it. My name is Wendell Ashby Stratton, though almost nobody uses the second half. I am 34 years old. I live in a rented bungalow in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver, Colorado. And on the morning everything changed, I was wearing a wrinkled blazer and carrying a duffel bag that smelled faintly of airport coffee. None of that matters except to say I did not look like a man who belonged on a private jet. I worked then, as I still do now, as a competitive horse feed nutritionist for a regional equine cooperative based out of Larkspur. It is a strange profession to say out loud. People hear it and assume I scoop oats. In truth, I spent my days running protein ratios, mineral balances, and seasonal forage analyses for thoroughbreds, cutting horses, and the occasional very expensive pony. I loved the work. I loved the horses more than I loved most people, which was, I had begun to suspect, part of my larger problem. My larger problem had a name, and his name was Roscoe Vandermeer. We had been together 4 years. He was kind, steady, a good man with a good laugh, and I had known for nearly 8 months that I was no longer in love with him. I had not said the words yet. I had been telling myself I would. I had been telling myself a great many things. That Tuesday in October, I was scheduled to fly from Denver International to Lexington for an equine nutrition conference. The storm rolling over the Front Range had other ideas. By the time I reached the airport, 3 gates were dark, 2 airlines had stopped boarding, and the departures board looked like a slot machine that had given up. I wandered, exhausted, toward the far end of Concourse B, where a quieter corridor branched off toward what I assumed was an overflow gate. A woman in a navy uniform smiled at me. "Mr. Ashby," she said. I blinked. My last name is Ashby Stratton, but people drop the second half all the time. I nodded out of habit. She waved me through a side door, down a stairwell, and onto a wet, gleaming patch of tarmac where a small white jet sat humming under floodlights. I should have stopped. I should have asked questions, but I had been awake since 4, the rain was sideways, and somewhere in my tired mind I decided that my airline must have upgraded a stranded passenger to a charter. I climbed the stairs. A flight attendant offered me sparkling water in actual glass. I sat in a wide leather seat that smelled like new books. I closed my eyes for exactly 9 seconds. When I opened them, a man was standing in the aisle staring at me as though I had wandered out of a dream and forgotten to leave. He was tall, lean, with dark hair cut close on the sides and a soft wave on top. He wore a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than my rent, and his eyes were the unsettling pale gray of river ice. He was beautiful in a way that made me want to apologize for existing in the same square footage. "I'm sorry," he said with surprising gentleness. "Who are you?" I tried to answer. What came out was, "Ashby, Wendell, I think I'm on the wrong plane." He tilted his head. The flight attendant materialized with a tablet, her face draining of color as she scrolled. "Mr. Quintrell," she said. "There appears to have been a clerical." "It's fine," the man said, still looking at me. "We haven't pushed back yet. He can deplane if he wants." Then, quieter, almost to himself, "Or he can stay. I do not know why I did not stand up. I will be unpacking that for the rest of my life." Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the way he said it, like an offer rather than a dare. Maybe it was something underneath all of that, something I had been ignoring for 8 months and could feel rising in my chest like weather. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Bozeman," he said. "Family thing. I'd rather not go alone." Outside, lightning split the sky over the Rockies. Inside, a stranger named Mr. Quintrell was watching me as if he already knew the answer I was about to give, and I, fool that I am, gave it. "Okay," I said. He smiled just slightly and sat down across from me. The door sealed. The engines shifted pitch. We taxied into the rain. His full name, I learned in the first 10 minutes, was Thatcher Quintrell. He was 36, born in Charleston, raised mostly in Colorado, and he ran a venture firm that specialized in funding small agricultural technology startups. He did not say wealthy. He did not have to, the jet said it for him. What surprised me was how easy he was to talk to. He asked about my work, and when I mentioned trace mineral balancing in lactating mares, he leaned forward instead of glazing over. He asked the right second question, which is the only test that has ever mattered to me. By the time we leveled off above the storm, I had told him about the cooperative, about my favorite stubborn old gelding named Biscuit, about the way Colorado smelled in October when the aspens turned. "And the man whose ring you're not wearing but used to?" he asked, nodding at my left hand. I looked down. There was still a pale band where Roscoe's promise ring had been. I had taken it off 3 weeks earlier, telling myself it was because of a swollen knuckle. I had not put it back on. Thatcher noticed all of it without ever making me feel watched. "It's complicated," I said. "It usually is." I told him then, more honestly than I had told anyone, that I was in a relationship that had quietly ended inside me months ago, and that I had been too kind or too cowardly to say so. I told him I was flying to Lexington for a conference, except now I was flying to Bozeman, apparently, with a man I did not know. I told him I had not cheated on Roscoe, not with my body, not with my mouth, not even in the small private rooms of my imagination. But I also told him that something about sitting across from him felt like the first honest breath I had taken in a year, and that scared me. He listened. He did not reach for my hand. He did not flirt. He simply said, "Then before anything else happens between you and anyone, you owe that man a real conversation. Not because of me, because of you." I almost cried. I do not know how to explain that to you except to say no one had ever told me what I owed myself in such a clean sentence. We landed in Bozeman a little after noon. The mountains were dusted in early snow. A black SUV waited on the tarmac. Thatcher hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. "I know this is strange," he said, "but I have a guest cabin on the property where I'm headed. You can use it for one night, get yourself a real ticket home tomorrow, and we'll pretend this was just a very expensive misunderstanding. Or," he paused, "or you can come to dinner with my family and tell me more about Biscuit the gelding. No pressure either way." I should have said no. I should have called Roscoe. I should have done 100 sensible things. Instead, I looked at this stranger, at the snow on the mountains behind him, and I felt the ground shift under my life in a way I knew I could not undo. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and the screen lit up with a name I had not expected to see, and everything I thought I understood about this day cracked straight down the middle. The name on the screen was not Roscoe. It was my sister, Marigoldan, calling from Pueblo, where she runs a small physical rehabilitation program for retired ranch dogs. She does not call in the middle of the day, she texts. She had called twice already that morning while I had been midair with no signal. I answered with snow biting my cheeks. "Mari, what's wrong?" "It's Dad," she said. Her voice was steady, which meant she was holding it together for me. "He had a small stroke last night. He's stable, he's talking, he's furious at the nurses. But you should come home, not today necessarily, just soon." I closed my eyes. My father, Hollis Ashby Stratton Sr., was 71, retired from a long career as a railroad signal mechanic, and the kind of man who had taught me to braid a horse's mane before he taught me to tie my shoes. He was also the only person in my family who had told me, the day I came out at 19, that he had known since I was 6 and loved me more for finally saying it out loud. "I'll fly down tomorrow," I said. "Where are you?" "Bozeman somehow." "Wendell, I know, I'll explain later." When I hung up, Thatcher was watching me with quiet concern. I told him the short version. He did not perform sympathy. He did not say the empty things people say. He simply said, "Then come to dinner, eat something hot, sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow will get you to Pueblo, not Denver. My plane, my pilot, my problem." I started to refuse. He held up a hand. "Wendell, let someone help you for one evening. You can argue about it after dessert." The property turned out to be a working ranch about 40 minutes outside Bozeman, sprawled along a creek with a low timber lodge at its center. The family thing was a 70th birthday dinner for his aunt, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Persimmon Quintrell Hoyle who had spent her career as a federal wildlife disease researcher and who, within 10 minutes of meeting me, was asking specific questions about copper toxicity in alfalfa-heavy diets. I liked her immediately. I liked all of them, actually. Thatcher's mother, a gentle architect named Briani, hugged me before she shook my hand. His older brother, Caspian, who built custom saddles for a living, asked about my work with the cooperative as though he had been waiting all year to meet someone who could explain mineral premixes properly. There was a younger cousin home from college, a niece chasing a barn cat, and an old border collie named Pudding who put her head in my lap during dessert and refused to move. Nobody asked how Thatcher and I knew each other. Nobody assumed anything. When Briani showed me to the guest cabin that night, she paused at the door and said, "He doesn't bring people here." I don't know what today is, but you seem like a good one. Sleep well. I lay awake for a long time listening to the creek. I thought about Roscoe asleep in our bungalow in Denver, probably with the kitchen light on the way he always left it. I thought about my father in a hospital bed in Pueblo, irritated and alive. I thought about a man named Thatcher who had handed me a kindness with no string attached to it, and how unfamiliar that felt, and how much that said about the life I had been quietly tolerating. I called Roscoe the next morning before the sun was fully up. I told him about my father first. He offered to drive down to Pueblo and meet me there, and I told him no, gently. Then I said the words I had been swallowing for 8 months. I told him that I loved who he had been to me, that I respected him, that he had done nothing wrong, and that I had to stop pretending I was still in this the way he deserved. He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "I've known, Wendell. I've been waiting for you to be brave enough to say it." He did not yell, he did not cry. He thanked me for not lying to him any longer, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. We agreed that I would move my things out the following weekend, that we would split the lease cleanly, that we would not pretend to be friends right away, but that we might be in time. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed in a cabin in Montana and cried for 10 full minutes, not because I had lost him, but because I had finally given him the truth. Thatcher was on the lodge porch when I came out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one without a word. We watched the creek for a while. I told him, I said, "How do you feel? Like I owe him better than I gave him, like I'm relieved, like I'm a worse person than I want to be." "You're not a worse person," Thatcher said. "You're a person who waited too long and finally stopped waiting. Those are not the same thing." We flew to Pueblo that afternoon. He did not come into the hospital with me. He stayed at a small inn near the river and texted only once, to say he was around if I needed anything and otherwise would respect the space. My father was sitting up when I walked in, complaining about the gelatin. He looked smaller than I remembered. He gripped my hand hard. "You look different," he said. "I broke up with Roscoe yesterday," he nodded slowly. "Good, he was a fine man. He was not your man." "Dad, what? I'm allowed to say things now. I almost died." He almost smiled. "Who's the one waiting outside? How did you walked in here like somebody just put a window in your chest." "I'm a father, Wendell, not a fool." I told him about Thatcher. The whole strange story, the wrong jet, the dinner, the cabin by the creek. My father listened with his eyes half closed, the way he used to listen to baseball on the radio. When I finished, he said, "Bring him by tomorrow. I want to look at him." So I did. Thatcher walked into that hospital room with a paper bag of better coffee than the cafeteria sold, sat down beside my father's bed. And within 20 minutes, the two of them were deep in a conversation about freight rail signal systems and how the industry had changed since deregulation. My father, who had spent 41 years on the rails, was visibly delighted. Thatcher, it turned out, had funded a startup 3 years earlier that built diagnostic sensors for aging rail infrastructure. He knew the vocabulary, he knew the history. He was not performing. When we left, my father caught my sleeve. "Wendell," he said quietly, "don't be careful with this one. Be honest with him. Careful is what cost you 4 years. I stayed in Pueblo for 6 days. Thatcher stayed too, working remotely from the inn, not crowding me, taking my sister out to lunch when she drove down, walking with me along the river in the evenings when the hospital let me go. He did not kiss me, he did not even hold my hand. He treated the space between us like something worth protecting until I was ready to cross it cleanly. On the fifth night, I asked him why. Why the patience? Why the restraint? Why a man like him would pause his entire life for a stranger he met on a plane? He looked at the water for a long time. Then he said, because I lost someone I loved 4 years ago to a car accident on a road outside Salada, and for a long time afterward I told myself I'd never feel anything that big again. And then a tired man in a wrinkled blazer sat in my seat by mistake, and I felt something I have not felt in 4 years. And I would rather wait for you to be free than rush you into something that hurts the next version of us. I did not know what to say. So I said the only thing that was true, I'm not free yet, but I'm closer than I was on Tuesday. He nodded. Then I'll wait. We flew back to Denver the next morning. I moved my things out of the bungalow that weekend with Roscoe's quiet help. I rented a small place in the Baker neighborhood near a coffee shop called Iron Magnolia where the barista knew my order by the third visit. I went back to work. I called my father every other day. I did not see Thatcher for 3 weeks by mutual agreement because we both knew that what was happening between us needed room to breathe before it could grow into anything real. And then, on a cold Thursday in November, I came out of the cooperative office in Larkspur after a long day of revising winter feed protocols, and there was a black SUV parked next to my truck. Thatcher was leaning against it, hands in his coat pockets, looking like he had been rehearsing something for 100 miles. "Hi," he said. "Hi." I drove down because I didn't want to do this over the phone. My stomach dropped. I had spent 3 weeks bracing for the possibility that the man on the jet had been a beautiful accident, that the version of him I had met in Montana would not survive contact with real life. I had told myself I would survive that too if it came. "Do what?" I said. He took a breath. "Ask you to start something with me, not a fling, not a rebound, the whole thing, slowly, carefully." But really, the wind moved across the parking lot and lifted a few aspen leaves between us. I opened my mouth to answer, and that was the moment my phone rang for the third time in an hour with a number I did not recognize. And the voice on the other end said a sentence that turned my knees to water and made Thatcher catch my elbow before I went down. The voice belonged to a hospital in Pueblo. My father had suffered a second stroke that afternoon, larger than the first. He was alive. He was not stable. They needed me to come now. Thatcher drove. He did not ask. He simply opened the passenger door of my own truck, took my keys from my shaking hand, and pointed his SUV south behind us with one of his ranch staff at the wheel. The drive from Larkspur to Pueblo is just under 2 hours. We made it in just under 90 minutes. I do not remember most of it. I remember his hand on top of mine on the console. I remember him saying more than once, "He is still here. We are going to him. Breathe." My father lived through that night. He lived through the next 4 nights. On the 5th morning, with my sister on one side of his bed and me on the other, he opened his eyes, looked at us both, and said very clearly, "I'm tired, kids." He died that afternoon. Holding my hand with the late autumn light coming through the window and a Johnny Cash record playing low on the small speaker my sister had brought from home. He was not afraid. He told me in his last full sentence that he was proud of me. He told my sister the same. He asked us to take care of each other and the dogs. He closed his eyes. He went. Thatcher was in the waiting room. He had been there for 5 days, going back to the inn only to shower and change. When I walked out and saw him stand up, I did not have to say anything. He crossed the room and held me while I cried into his coat, and he did not say a single one of the useless sentences people say at times like that. He just held on. The funeral was the following week in a small chapel outside Pueblo. Roscoe came, which surprised me and did not surprise me. He hugged my sister. He shook Thatcher's hand with the careful dignity of a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, to be larger than his hurt. Later on the chapel steps, he caught my sleeve and said, "He's a good one, Wendell. I can tell. Be happy. I mean that." I believed him. I will be grateful for that sentence for the rest of my life. Grief is a strange architect. It tears down rooms you thought were load-bearing and builds new ones you did not know you needed. In the months after my father died, I learned things about myself I had been avoiding for years. I learned that I had spent most of my adult life trying to be useful instead of known. I learned that I had chosen Roscoe partly because being loved by him was easier than being seen by him. I learned that I had been waiting, without realizing it, for someone who would not let me hide. Thatcher did not let me hide. He also did not push. He moved at the pace of my actual healing, not the pace of his own hope. He came down to Denver on weekends. I drove up to the ranch outside Bozeman once a month. We talked on the phone almost every night, sometimes for hours, sometimes for the length of one shared cup of tea before bed. He met my sister properly. She approved with the same blunt clarity my father would have. He listens like he means it, she said. Keep him. We did not rush the physical part of things. Our first real kiss happened nearly 4 months after the jet, on the porch of the cabin where I had first slept in Montana, on a night so cold the stars looked sharpened. It was not cinematic. It was quiet. It tasted like coffee and like a long wait ending. Afterward, he pressed his forehead against mine and said, "I have been thinking about that since you fell asleep for 9 seconds in my cabin." I laughed for the first time in what felt like a season. A year after the day I boarded the wrong jet, I moved out of the Baker bungalow and into a small house Thatcher and I bought together on a quiet street in the Park Hill neighborhood of Denver. He kept the ranch, I kept my job. We split our weeks between the two places and we built a life in the seams. I planted a vegetable garden that mostly produced disappointment. He learned, after considerable patience from Biscuit, to approach a horse from the correct side. We adopted a senior beagle from my sister's rehabilitation program and named him Marshall, after my father's middle name. I want to tell you the truth about what this story is and is not. It is not a fairy tale. I did not stumble onto a private jet and find a man who solved my life. I stumbled onto a private jet at the exact moment when my life was demanding to be solved by me, and I happened to meet someone willing to stand beside that work instead of in front of it. Those are different stories. The second one is the only one that lasts. I think often about the boarding agent who waved me through the wrong door. I have wondered if she ever realized her mistake, if she got in trouble, if she remembers the tired man in the wrinkled blazer. I have wanted more than once to find her and thank her, though I am not sure she would understand what for. The truth is that her small error was not the miracle. The miracle was that I said yes when Thatcher asked if I wanted to stay, and that I told Roscoe the truth the next morning, and that I sat with my father while he died. And that I let myself be loved afterward by someone who had also known loss and had decided anyway to try again. My father used to say that the rails always know where they are going, even when the train forgets. I did not understand that sentence as a child. I understand it now. There were tracks underneath my whole life that I could not see from the seat I was sitting in. The storm in Denver, the open door, the empty cabin, the stranger in Kashmir, the call from my sister, the hospital room in Pueblo, the porch in Montana, the kiss that tasted like coffee. None of it was random. None of it was destiny, either, not in the way people mean when they use that word. It was simply the route I was always on, finally becoming visible. Thatcher proposed on a Sunday morning in the kitchen of the Park Hill house, 2 years almost to the day after the wrong jet. There was no ring yet. There was a cup of coffee and a quiet question and a beagle asleep under the table. I said yes before he finished asking. We were married the following spring on the ranch, under the cottonwoods by the creek, with my sister officiating and Roscoe sending a card that I read aloud to Thatcher in private the night before. Because it was that kind of card, and we are that kind of family now. If you are listening to this and you are tired and you are in a life that fits you the way a borrowed coat fits, please hear me. You do not have to wait for a storm to ground your plane. You do not have to wait for a clerical error to walk you through the wrong door. You are allowed to tell the truth on a regular Tuesday. You are allowed to leave kindly. You are allowed to grieve what you had while still choosing what you need. You are allowed to be loved by someone who sees you, not just someone who tolerates you. You are allowed at 34 or 54 or 74 to begin. I boarded the wrong jet on a rainy October morning in Denver. I came home, eventually, to the right life. My father did not get to see the wedding, but he saw enough. He saw me walk into his hospital room with a window in my chest. He saw the man who put it there. He told me not to be careful. I have tried every day since to be honest instead. The beagle is snoring at my feet as I record this. Thatcher is in the next room on a call about a new agricultural sensor company out of Bozeman. The kettle is about to whistle. Outside, the first snow of the season is starting to fall over Park Hill, and somewhere south of here a horse named Biscuit is eating a winter ration I balanced myself. This is the life I almost missed. This is the life that was always waiting, one wrong door away. Thank you for staying until the end of it with me. If any part of this story found you